Well, what's going on, everyone? It is good to see you here once again on the stream to come and relax, do some painting, do some chatting, just all around have a good time. So, to be honest, it's been a rough week. Had some really interesting stuff happen at work. So I'm excited about starting this new mini tonight, hanging out with all of y'all. And I'm sorry. Why does McDonald's want to step all over the actual masterpiece that is Chick-fil-A waffle fries? That's what I'd like to know. But beyond that, we do have a new mini today. So we finished the Wizard on Monday, which is kind of weird because I've never started a new mini halfway through the week. But it is what it is. So I actually put a vote in my Discord about which mini everybody would like to see. And the most votes was actually not what I was expecting based upon some conversations I had with other people. But without further ado, let's check out the miniature we're going to be painting today. So this is a Minotaur by WizKids. So WizKids recently came out with a line of miniatures called Frameworks. So WizKids got really big and really popular because they made inexpensive PVC miniatures that you could just buy for $2 or $3, and they were pre-primed, ready to go, really accessible. Well, they just came out with a line of sprue miniatures so that instead of being pre-made, you could actually assemble them, pick out different options, different bits, and it's amazing. Calico, I would be concerned with that if you didn't also vote for this miniature as well. You voted for both the mermaid and this miniature. Like, I can literally see you reacted with a thumbs up to this miniature to vote for it. So, I mean, it was honestly a close match between the two. This got 4 votes and the mermaid got 3 votes. So this one almost didn't win out, but it's a smaller miniature, so it actually works out. I don't know if I'll be able to finish it tonight. But there's a good chance I can if I stop rambling on about it. So anyway, to start off with, we went ahead and did, as we always do, a Zenithal undercoat. So I primed it in black, and then I took a white ink and sprayed over that to get kind of this shaded shadow look. Like we talked about before on the stream, it really helps with natural highlighting, things like that. So without further ado, let's get started. So, first thing we'll want to do is figure out what color do we want his coat to be. Because he has a lot of leather on, I'm really tempted to just make it black. The problem with black is extremely difficult to paint. The reason for that is it's hard to highlight black without making it look gray and reading more as gray than black. So for that reason, mostly I'm leaning more towards brown. And then maybe we can mess with the color of the leather instead. So maybe make it black leather with some of these little details on here, silver, which I think would look pretty cool. So I think that's the direction we're gonna go in. So let's grab some paint from the rack and start. So I'm gonna grab a couple different browns and a couple different shades. So I'm grabbing some uniform brown, which I'm not a huge fan of, but sometimes it works really well depending. Some earth brown by Reaper, and some muddy brown by Reaper. This is a little bit more of a red brown. This is more of a dirt brown, and this is more of almost like a World War I kind of khaki brown. Still looks good. Beyond that, I've got my olive skin Triad by Reaper that I could also add to it for maybe the stomach. So the stomach would be a lighter shade than the rest of it. Well, it depends on, for that calico, it depends on what the leather is made out of. Not all leather is made from cowhide. And then lastly, we have the leather brown. So, just to prevent this miniature from being just brown, you know, different shades of brown, we're going to paint the stomach, the part that looks more like bare skin, a different shade than a lot of his fur, and his hair and all that kind of stuff. So, first things first, let's take our olive skin shade. Go ahead and throw some of that on the palette. And that's going to be our base coat for the stomach. We'll also go ahead and put down our mid-tone for the olive skin, and finally our highlight. Oop, if it'll come out, it looks like it's got a little bit of clog in the nozzle. There we go. We won't need much of that. So let's go ahead and start with that. I'm going to grab my number 2 brush, because since we're base coating, we don't really need a super fine tip brush, but we want something on the small side because this is a smaller miniature. All right, so where I want this color to start and kind of stop is just underneath the shoulders, on the chest, and on the stomach is really where I want this color to, I guess you could say, live. And then we're going to come down just under his rib cage here, and that will be kind of where our transition point between whatever color we do the rest of the miniature on and this color. Gone already, Calico? I guess she had to go to work. I think that's what happened on Monday too. So we're just going to make sure that we get good coverage. I'm also going to make to use this color on kind of, he's got these collarbones here. I'll use it on there as well. Like that. So, and I haven't completely decided on this yet, but I may extend this color to his back because there is more skin texture on the back versus fur. And then we'll use the fur texture on the arms, the legs, the tail, the hair, and the face as well. Yeah, I think I'll do that. Now, one of the things that I noticed when I was assembling this particular miniature, and I kind of purposefully didn't fix it in this one. I've got a couple of others from this line, but there were several really bad gaps during assembly. So normally you can fill that with something like green stuff, Zap-A-Gap, or Milliput, something like that. In this case, I didn't, because I really wanted to kind of, I don't know, show this miniature as like if I were a amateur hobbyist, which technically I am amateur because I don't get paid for this, but like a new hobbyist, for instance. And I heard so much awesome stuff about the Frameworks miniature because it's been kind of anticipated for a long time because WizKids did so much other stuff well. So you've got this really odd gap here on his shoulder joint. It's hard to see now I've painted it. There's a gap right on the top of his head, and there's a really bad gap where his shoulder meets his elbow, or what, like right where his upper arm meets his lower arm, right there. And if I was a painter that didn't really know how to assemble models, fill gaps, or even have the tools to do so, I don't know, having something like this would be really frustrating. So if you are a new painter and you're thinking about getting this, or really getting into any kind of sprue or assembled miniature at all, make sure that you kind of know what you're getting into, that there will be some fixing and repairing, whether that be sanding down sprue marks, whether that is repairing gaps, things like that. This is not going to be like your normal like ready to paint miniature like WizKids normally makes. These are definitely going to be more of a chore for you if you've never made sprue style miniatures before. If you play Warhammer or other war games similar to that, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and it's it's not new to you at all. I will say most Games Workshop stuff that I've painted so far or assembled, I haven't really worried about gaps, but they are there. So we're just working in this base coat, and one of the things that I haven't really mentioned in a while, so if there's any of you who are here that are new, one of the things that you have to recognize when you're base coating a miniature, first of all, you want to make sure that you have a fairly thin first coat. Don't really worry about how the miniature looks on the first coat, because really what you want to do is get 2 to 3 thin coats on all of your areas, because what that'll do is it'll give you a nice consistent finish. You'll have minimal brush marks. You're going to have a more consistent finish, right? So it won't look splotchy. And the color will actually look a little bit better as well. So lots of benefits to doing 2 to 3 coats. And really what I would say is just paint it up to your desired opacity. So for instance, in this case, since we're using a zenithal highlight, I don't actually want this to come to full opacity. I don't want the paint to be opaque. I want it to be a little bit translucent so that my highlights, my natural highlights from the zenithal highlight actually come through. Because if I work this all the way up to full opacity, then I would lose something there. I would lose all that work from actually doing this style of highlight. Now granted, I'm using an airbrush, so like losing time is like the 5 minutes it took, if that, to do it. But I still don't want to lose that time and work that I put into this. So we want to make sure that our miniature is nice, consistent color that is a little bit translucent. So I'm probably only going to go to 2 coats, and we'll see where we're at when that is finished. And as always, you want to make sure that it is mostly dry. It doesn't have to be fully dry, but it has to be dry enough so that when you put down the second coat, you're not ripping up the first coat. And dry time is going to vary wildly depending on the paint you use. There we go. That's looking nice so far. Again, our only goal in this stage of the miniature is just to get everything painted. I'm not super concerned about looking for mistakes. I'm not super concerned about whether or not my coats are super consistent right now, because I know I'm going to be adding multiple layers. All right. So we're just trying to focus on the torso, the neck, arms right now, and then we'll come back after we're finished those areas, and then we'll kind of move on to some of the fur, because we want to kind of decide on what color we want to make the fur. Do we want it to be which one of the brown, what shade of brown do we want to add a little bit of black? Do we want to add a little bit of another color, like maybe red? Do we want to make his fur gray? Do we want to make his fur black to kind of break that up? So like how exactly do we want this guy to look in the end? Which is something we kind of need to know. But I am terrible at actually planning out my color palette. So I usually just kind of paint and make the decision as I'm painting. It's super cliche, and I've heard so many painters say this, and it sounds like super artsy or whatever, but I really do kind of let the miniature talk for itself. And again, I know that sounds super cliche and artsy, but because this miniature has a bit of character to it, I want to make sure that I'm painting the miniature in a way that complements what it's doing, the pose that it's in, and the gear that it has on. So I don't want this guy to be like super happy looking, right? Because he's like in like bright pinks and all that kind of color, because that would be ridiculous for a creature that looks like it is attacking something brutally. Oh man, that actually felt really good. So, but at the same time, I don't want to paint this guy up in a bunch of reds and yellows and make him look demonic, because yeah, he's a Minotaur, but he's, you know, I gotta make him look like a cow, dude. Last time I checked, cows aren't red. Not like a demon would be anyway. All right, cool. All right, so let's go ahead and choose our brown. So really what I'm trying to figure out is, what shade do I want to use? Do I want to start with kind of this khaki brown? Do I want to go with more of the neutral earth brown? Do I want to add a little bit of character in there and use a more red brown? These two are part of the same triad. So for instance, you see these numbers on the front, 9029 and 9028. So this is technically the shade for this color. So these two would complement each other if I use this as, say, my base coat and this is my highlight. So we could do that. In fact, let's try that, because I'm curious now as to how it's going to look. So we're going to base coat in the muddy brown, which is kind of this reddish mahogany type brown. So take this and start applying it. You know what? I'm gonna switch my brush. Textured areas typically are a little bit harsher on brushes, so I'm actually gonna switch to one of my synthetic brushes here. Just so I don't have to worry about that brush getting ruined for me. Because I don't really care if I ruin a synthetic brush, because they're super cheap to replace, right? Like I can get a brush just like this one for, you know, 10 bucks for a pack of 10 of them. And then when they get worn out, just throw them away, buy another set. But with my nice Kolinsky Sable brushes, they're like 20 bucks a piece. There's no way I want to ruin those. So one aspect, I guess you could say, of painting that I've been kind of trying to get more into is realism. So painting a miniature in a way that would be natural, right? And one of the things that I have an opportunity here to kind of try that out on are the hooves. So I'll probably not do that tonight, just because I want to do a little bit of research on hooves, because hooves are very much so like fingernails, where they're not exactly opaque. So I kind of want to do some research on how to paint a hoof to make it actually look like a hoof instead of just black or brown. Just like we're going to do some dry brushing on this dude's fur to make it look like it has shade and highlights. Similarly, I want to make sure that our hooves actually look like hooves. And there are ways to paint material to make them look more transparent. I've done it before on several different things like cloth or hair, things like that. And essentially what you do is you base coat it in the color that you want to be showing through, and then you apply very thin coats and thin layers and washes over that until the colors change just enough to make it look like it's being obscured by something, almost as if you're looking through cloth, I guess, into whatever you originally painted. It's hard to kind of get the balance right, but once you do get the balance right, it looks so good. One of the things I might do too, just depending on what I'm feeling once we get this whole thing base coated, I might try to choose a few complementary colors just to kind of start adding some highlights and some texture and some cool kind of shades to this that aren't necessarily natural. So kind of blend in the normal, like artsy kind of miniature painting style along with a more realistic, which is kind of where I like to live. I kind of like to live in a place where it's obviously a fantasy model. I'm not trying to mimic reality, but at the same time, there's enough reality in it to make it look really, really nice. And sometimes I succeed, sometimes I don't. And that's, like we talked about yesterday, that is life. Sometimes you nail it, sometimes you gotta try a couple more times. That's okay, it's all part of the learning process. And I am definitely still learning. By the way, I don't know if any of you are interested in this, but the painting handle I'm using is actually by a company called Loot Studios, where I know I've mentioned them here before. They do a lot of really cool miniatures and sculpts and things like that. They, in their starter set, so that when you subscribe to them, they give you a bunch of miniatures of like the starter set, and in the starter set they have this paint handle that you can print out and use. And for me, I've had, I have this like Games Workshop handle. I've used bottle caps. I've used small wooden plinths. I've used corks. And by far, this is the handle that I keep coming back to every single time. It works really well. It's dead simple. It's literally just a clamp with a couple rubber bands put on it. But I just keep coming back to it every single time I paint a miniature. Lately, I've been using the Games Workshop one, the smaller one, for my small miniatures. Mostly because it works better for that than this one does. But anything bigger than like a 28 millimeter or a 32 millimeter miniature, I'm going for this baby. So much so that this is actually the second handle section. So it comes in two sections. It comes in this, like the actual grip part, and then the handle itself. And I've actually already gone through one handle that broke on me. I used this particular handle section for like a year and a half when it broke. And so then I started using it. I take a little bit of sticky tack, put it on the end, and I still use this to paint with every so often, depending on the miniature I'm using. So even when I stop using them, I still use them. And they are good handles for sure. And again, dead simple, cheap to make, right? If you have a 3D printer, especially if you're using filament instead of resin, which that's what I use to print this out. I think it was like 10-20 grams of PLA, which is like maybe $2, if not, actually it's probably less, versus, you know, $12 for the Games Workshop, the new Games Workshop one. The old Games Workshop one I think was like 20 something bucks. Obviously more expensive than like a piece of dowel or a piece of, or like a wine cork, but this is just so much more functional than anything else I've ever used, so it works well for me. But as always, if you are a 3D printer and want to get into the painting hobby, I would highly, 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 highly recommend any of Loot Studio stuff. They're amazing. You know they're amazing because I am 100% not sponsored by them. So there's a little bit of skin showing down here. So we're just gonna hit that with our skin tone. Wasn't sure if I was going to earlier, but I think I will. There's enough here to where it would look weird to just paint it all this same kind of fur brown that I'm going with. Or mud brown, I should say. Some of these areas are going to kind of be awkward to get to, but part of the challenge. Got to take my phone out of my pocket. It was vibrating. And I don't know about y'all, but I get super distracted by my phone, so I prefer when I'm streaming to just take it out of my pocket, throw it on my desk. That way it's not sitting there vibrating in my pocket and distracting me. And I can focus on my work. And focus on relaxing too, because I don't have to worry about anything going on. Oh, and the Slack messages start. Dude, I exit out of this thing, but for whatever reason, it still... I need to just mute every single channel. Let's talk about distracting. And since y'all can actually hear it, it's even worse. Where... Just looking for places where I've missed. Because again, the biggest thing for me is I want to make sure that I'm not missing any part of the miniature. I don't have any blank spots or anything like that. And one of the things you'll notice me doing every so often is when I go back to the paint that I'm using, even if I'm going back to the same color, I'll still wash out my brush. I've just found that sometimes if you keep the same color on there for too long, that paint will start to dry out and it will actually end up causing you to lose the tip, like the point on the tip of your brush, in which case you lose precision. All right, so that's his body. I know he looks kind of green right now, but trust me, once we start moving up to our midtones and our highlight, he will look a lot different. Because we're really only going to keep this color in the very deepest recesses on this miniature. Everything else is going to be that mid-tone. And then the highlight will come, of course, on all these awesome highlights. So if y'all are wanting to learn how to do like skin really, really well, I would check out Squidmar's version, tutorial on how to do skin. He is a painter. I can't remember what country he's from, but he is amazing and has a bunch of really awesome tutorials. He also has a really good tutorial on how to make realistic eyes. And I followed like the basic method, not a more advanced method that he has in that same video, but I use the basic method that he uses in it. I've always had really, really good results, which is essentially base coat your eye in red, paint the inside of what would be the white areas of your eye with an off-white or beige and not with white. And then all of his advice on how to do the iris and the pupil is spot on, and I've had really good results using that method. So highly recommend it if you want to get into the miniature painting hobby. But he's the one I learned it from. Also, I feel like I talk a lot in the very beginning of all my streams, but then once the stream gets going, like we're an hour and a half in or something, I almost stop talking altogether. Maybe because I get bored or run out of something to say, or everybody leaves chat. So there are some parts of this miniature that I am kind of interested in trying and really kind of looking forward to it. So the axe is going to be one, because the axe, I'm really planning on doing some non-metallic metal like I would normally. Not the greatest non-metallic metal, but you know, I think it looks cool. But I feel like his axe is like really beat up. It's not super sharp. It's not gonna be super shiny. So we might do some of that rust effect that I did on the pirate. And then we might do a little bit of like that same non-metallic metal that I used on the angel I did. But to a lesser extent. So more like I did with the sword pirates, where I did all of the non-metallic metal and then I used a wash to kind of dull it down. And then add the rust effect afterwards. I could do that. Or I could just make it look completely rusty with a sharp edge. So kind of combine what I did with the sword on the base of the pirate with the sword that was in the pirate's hand. I forgot this dude's ears. How dare I? He needs to hear stuff. There we go. All right, so let's grab our black and gray black and we'll start base coating the leather. So we are going to do a black leather on this. I think that is my final decision, which I think will look kind of cool. Not super practical, because why would you, if you're a rough and tough boy like this guy is, why would you take the time to dye your leather black instead of just using it naturally? But we don't know we don't know this guy. He could be an absolute gentleman of a Minotaur and only buys the finest leather from the finest craftsmen in the realms. Just so happens to have a terrible axe. It's like, this axe has been through me thick and thin. Why would I replace it? Still kills people just fine. Yeah, but it's rusty, so just has more pain. That was dumb. once again, so with black, the issue, well, not really an issue, the thing I'm contemplating is how do I actually want to treat this black? So do I want to get a nice opaque color on this and trust my own instincts as far as the highlighting goes? Or do I want to leave it slightly translucent and let the zenithal undercoat do its job? That, my friends, is part of the question. Because again, we don't want the black to look transparent or translucent, but at the same time, why do we go through all the trouble of the zenithal undercoat if we're just going to cover it all up? Which, to be fair, the rest of the miniature is utilizing the zenithal, so I think I would rather go with a more opaque color. And I totally 100% forgot his tail. We'll grab it in just a second after I'm done this base coat. Oof. So we're just going to hit inside of these little metal rings here. I really do love the pose on this guy, though. I think it looks really, really cool. And I think because this is a larger miniature, I keep favoring that side. I don't know why. I'm going to scooch over so if I do, it'll be on a different angle. Okay. I don't remember what I was talking about at all. Thank you, ADHD. You know what? It's fine. These rings right here are more over his coat than the leather, so we'll add a little bit of brown inside those metal rings, which we will absolutely do some non-metallic metal on, so stay tuned for that. I think that looks cool. So, next thing we're going to do is make sure that we get... Oh, man, my shoulder's killing me right now. What was I saying? All right, his tail. I think I'm gonna make his tail the same color as his coat, because I would assume that it's not fleshy but furry. I never want to say that phrase again in the rest of my life. One of the things we're going to do with this, just so that we kind of make sure that it looks like fur instead of skin, is I'll use that same technique that I used to do some of the wear on the pirate, where I took that really like scraggly looking brush and kind of dry brush using something that's really splayed out to kind of, again, just give a little bit of texture so that it reads more like fur than it does skin. Now, it should do that anyway because we're using the same colors as his fur, but again, we want to make sure that we are covering all of our bases on this one. All right, so already done my second coat on his torso for the most part. So let's go ahead and hit the rest of his skin. Like on his arms, his hands, all that good stuff. Oh, there's a big old part that I missed. Good grief, on under his forearm. Missed both my skin tone and the fur. Not the last time that'll happen, or not the first time that's happened. It won't be the last, I guarantee it. Now there is one miniature that I really, really want to paint on stream. So Frameworks, same people who made this, has a Pit Fiend. It's pretty expensive, but man, does it look cool. And I'd love to paint that on stream. I do have quite a backlog of miniatures that I can use for the stream. For instance, I've got the mermaid, still got the Buccaneer lady, and I've got the Githyanki warrior. So they're all female actually, interestingly enough. I don't really do a ton of female miniatures, honestly, not for any particular reason. I don't know why I just grabbed my fur color, but I guess I could do some work on the fur, but I'm just trying to do the skin. Mostly just because there are some aspects of painting female miniatures that I'm kind of uncomfortable with, right? So there's kind of this, I don't want to call it a trend, but with all things, there are those who try to over-sexualize it. And in miniatures, it is one of those things that is highly, highly sexualized. And so it's very difficult sometimes to find female models that aren't overly sexual. Like this kind of pin-up style, I guess you could call it, of miniature. So it's hard to find models that, number one, I think do justice to both A, look good, right? Look visually appealing without being in a pinup style, right? So, you know, that the woman who is being depicted in the miniature is depicted as being feminine, but also not sexualized. Loot Studios does a good job of this. They do have a couple models that are like, right? Which is why I'm kind of hesitant to do the mermaid, because it's a classic mermaid, right? It's half woman, or half fish, half naked woman. So, so there are things like that why I don't do a ton of female miniatures, just because it's hard to find ones that I feel comfortable painting. And there's also, like, I want to make sure that I'm being respectful to female anatomy as well. That what I am painting in a way that is not denigrating. Like, I'm not overemphasizing certain aspects of the body that I'm painting. So I don't necessarily avoid it, I just have a hard time finding models that kind of meet those criteria. And that's just a personal thing. Like, I know there are those up there, I've even met women who love painting pin-up style miniatures. And that's fine. If that's your thing, that's your thing. Me personally, I'm just not about that. All right, so we need some more of this muddy brown. But while that settles, let's go ahead and grab some of this, because I noticed on my base coat there were a couple areas that either the paint didn't set right or I just plain missed. What I mean by set right, like maybe the paint was a little bit too thin, and instead of staying on the surface, it ran into the crevices, but didn't actually stay where I put it and where I needed it. So I'm just going back and correcting some of that. And this is why we do several thin coats instead of doing one big coat, because we could end up with a splotchiness that comes from the paint running, or we can end up obscuring a lot of the details if the paint is too thick. And of course, since we're base coating, this is the most boring part of any miniature, in my humble opinion. Because I prefer the period of time where you start layering. And layering is when you start adding details, you start adding in highlights, bringing out different aspects of the miniature, things like that. So for his horns, I'm going to start with a base coat of, not that is the wrong paint and it is in the wrong spot. Where are you? Here you are. That's not it. Yeah, no, that's it. Xandri Dust by GW. So Xandri Dust is a really good base coat for things like parchment and bone. And since we have two massive antlers on this boy, I'm going to use this to paint the antlers. And then we will do a dry brushing of a bone color over this dust color. And then we'll do a polished bone highlight specifically. And then we will wash it with a brown wash. So that will make all of those little ridges that are molded into this plastic figure really pop nicely. One thing I'm excited about this weekend, there's actually a painting day at one of my local game shops that I really want to go to. I'm super excited about it. I always love meeting up with other local hobbyists because it's a good opportunity to kind of see how other people do work. And kind of chat with people and kind of build that community. So on this little pedestal here, we have like a bunch of antlers and stuff. Almost looks like it used to be some sort of shrine. So we're just going to hit that with the same colors that we are doing his horns with. Except in the end, we'll do something a little bit different as far as the colors go, so that we're not making all of it look identical. So we might end up doing, like, for instance, this like deer skull looking thing, even though it's, I guess, a deer skull. We'll end up painting that probably a little bit whiter or closer to white than his antlers. We want his antlers to look like they are growing, but we want this to look like it's been dead and baking in the sun for a while. Because I'm assuming, because it's a bunch of antlers, it almost looks like a druid thing, I guess you could say. Druidic. So it would be outside instead of like inside in a temple. I don't know. It's just the feeling I would get. If y'all have a different opinion, feel free to let me know. But it's just one of those details that we got to figure out along the way. Which again makes this almost like a journey of discovery. It's like, what does this miniature, how does this miniature want to be painted? What are these little details like? It's just amazing and so much fun to kind of discover exactly how you're going to paint the miniature before you paint it. Now, there is definitely something to be said about planning out colors and what palette you're going to use. 100%. Sometimes it's nice to just kind of go with the flow, you know? Like, obviously I knew the colors that I wanted to use. I knew I wanted to use brown. I knew I was going to use these colors for the bone. But along the way, we might change our mind on a few things. And that's okay. It's all part of the process. We also have some rope on this thing that I'm noticing now. Rope, the colors I like to do for rope, I like to combine the tanned leather color that I have, this stuff by Reaper, the leather brown, with a bone color, because what that would give me is kind of that yellow canvas kind of color. It looks really nice. I have no idea what this other horn's supposed to be, this kind of spirally horn. But we'll paint it anyway. Same color, and then if we decide we want something different, we can always change it. Again, I'm going to switch to my synthetic brush to prevent damaging my nice sable brush, since we're painting a lot of texture here. I don't know why I keep favoring like right here. Need a little bit more of that dust color. What's going on, Matt? How you doing, man? How was your day at the jewelry store? Realize I mentioned jewelry a little bit weird. Nice. I always wonder this, and this is kind of like the morbid side of me, or like the dark side of me, is like, do like jewelry stores have like a countdown of like, we've gone this many days without being robbed? You know, like factories have a, we've had this many days without an incident, like a safety incident. So, well, Matt, today we are painting awesome Minotaur. But right now I'm just painting this random bit on the back of it. Well, there you go. Can't really get a much better. Easy for me to say. Good grief. It's a pretty good record, I'd say. Also, this sculpt is so cool, dude. I'm glad y'all voted for it, because it just looks awesome. Oh yeah. I mean, I always assume that, especially in your neck of the woods, since you also live in the South. I almost like assumed that it would be like a pawn shop where everybody is just, it's assumed you're carrying. Grab some gray here. Reaching all the way over here, because like I kind of jokingly titled the last stream, I've outgrown my paint rack, but I really have, actually. I need to, I use a 3D printed paint rack, so I need to actually add another section to it once I actually expand my desk. So once again, I'm going to go in here and grab the stone structure that these skulls are on. Just going to paint it with that London gray, using my synthetic brush because there's a lot of texture on it and I don't want to ruin my nice one. Gotcha. I mean, but still, like, I don't mean to like your store is like a pawn shop, but it's like, you know, like the whole thing about pawn shop is like everybody's carrying, right? Everybody's packing who works there. So I feel like most jewelry stores in the United States that aren't in a mall, most of the employees are probably packing some pretty substantial heat. If not, then there's a gun somewhere in the store. You gotta think, with that much money in inventory, there's got to be some carriers all over that place. That's why I feel like jewelry stores are probably one of the worst places to try to rob if one was so inclined. Yeah. I would definitely be packing some serious heat if I was not only working at a jewelry store, but also handling that. There's absolutely no way I would work that job without some sort of self-protection. I'm really liking this sculpt. The only thing I don't like about it is these grooves in this pillar. It makes it look really nice, but they're kind of a pain to get to. Which again, like I mentioned earlier, there are some spots on this that are hard to get to, but that's part of the challenge. And then of course the real challenge is how do I take those hard to reach spots and actually make them look good without skipping them. Gotcha. And aren't most pieces of jewelry like tagged? So if they if somebody tries to sell it, like they'll get almost immediately, like it'll be flagged as stolen. I feel like I heard that somewhere. I don't remember where. So I'm gonna go ahead and move back to my nice sable brush and go ahead and do a second coat on the black leather. I need to come up with a backstory for this dude. Like, he's obviously a Minotaur. So do we think he's a Greco-Roman Minotaur to where it's like he is the Minotaur? Or do you think he's like a D&D Minotaur, which are a little bit more common? So are we thinking this guy is one of many or one of a kind? Gotcha. I feel like though, if you're one of the nicer places in the state, that my guess is you guys have probably taken the time to do so. So, I also want to decide whether or not this particular Minotaur is actually evil or not. Because obviously he's in a pose like he's about to stab something in the face. But is this a guy who has been raised by a Minotaur tribe, raised to be cruel and ruthless? Or was he maybe captured as a child, raised amongst other races like elves and humans, and seeks to kind of usurp or undermine the stereotype of what a Minotaur is, but in doing so kind of also, you know, in his quest to help people, he has ended up kind of also falling into the trap of he's a really good fighter, and so the way he fights injustice is through the sword, and so he kind of both tries to destroy the image of what a Minotaur is, but at the same time falls into that trap of using his physical attributes in a way that is stereotypical. I don't know. What do y'all think? I think that would be an interesting take on a Minotaur, where it's like, yeah, I don't want to be this brute that everybody thinks I am, but in order to help people, I kind of have to be. So that his life is like, no, I actually want to help you people. But then the way that people ask him to help is by using those attributes that he wants to, or those stereotypes that he ends up hating and despising. So he's like, yeah, I'm a fighter and I'm a warrior, but I don't want to be one. I just want to be me. But it's because of those stereotypes that people actually ask him for help. All right, man. Well, thanks for hopping on. Go scream your face off. I know I will probably hear it on Apple Music whenever you're done, or sooner. You never know. You know, with this guy 2-Bit Lane, you never know. So I'm just going back over and hitting the fur one more time because I'm still seeing some bright/dark spots from where the paint wasn't necessarily settling where I needed it to. So just one more coat to kind of fill in some of that. You notice I haven't started on the axe yet either. Oh, nice. I mean, your clean vocals are just as spicy as your screams, so. Either way, no doubt this is going to sound amazing, and I have no doubt that I will eventually hear it at some point. Dude, I kind of miss Liam. I wonder where he's at right now. He normally drops in to say hi. Calico, I think, had to work. And Cal hasn't dropped in yet. Hope everything's okay. I also hope that I am not hitting the same issues that I was hitting on Monday with the bad kind of, I don't know if it was bad bandwidth or what, but it's kind of annoying. But I haven't been told that I'm dropping any frames by Streamlabs, so I think we are all good as far as that goes, for now at least. You never know with good old Spectrum internet. Could all of a sudden just have nothing. That has happened before. A straight outage. For no reason. Wake up one day, got no internet. And I was work from home at that point, so that was pretty bad because I couldn't go in the office. So I think, if I remember correctly, I think I ended up attempting to work by using my phone as a hotspot. And let me tell you, That did not work out well. Cool. All right. So, because it's kind of gonna get everywhere, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and do the dry brushing on his hair. So we will grab our texture palettes, throw some earth brown on there, start working on some of this hair on this bad boy. Now, the one thing I don't like about Reaper paint, it's great because it's pre-thinned. It's awesome for airbrushing because you don't really have to do much. It's really good for layering and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty terrible for dry brushing because it's very thin. So all the reasons that I like it for my normal painting is the reason I don't like it for dry brushing. I would really like to find a very similar shade or pigment for another brand like Vallejo or probably not Army Painter. I used to use Army Painter a lot when I first got started, but recently I just found myself really not liking it. It's not well pigmented, in my opinion, when compared to paints like Reaper and Vallejo. Compared to Games Workshop, it's not as good, in my opinion, but it's not terrible. It's also very thick. It's a very thick paint too. So you can kind of see, like if we compare this leg to this leg, we can kind of see where that brown, that lighter shade of brown is giving me a nice texture, nice highlight there. Just enough to where it doesn't look flat and not as boring. That's one of the great things about dry brushing is it's very, very simple technique and it is extremely powerful when done correctly. Like, you can't just grab a brush, throw some paint on it and start slinging it everywhere like you can when you're base coating. You got to make sure that you don't use a ton of pressure to make sure that the dry brush is just kind of gliding over all of the raised edges. You want to make sure that your paint is, or your brush is dry and that you're getting off most of the paint from your brush so that when you do dry brush, you're not getting these weird streaks or brighter areas. So you get a nice consistent result. Maybe consistency isn't what you want. Maybe you want it to look super inconsistent, and that's fine. But just for a normal dry brushing for what you would use it for, like dirt, rocks, fur, you really want to make sure, or hair, I guess you say, not just fur, you really want to make sure that you have good consistency with your paint on the brush. Because we just want to hit the very, very top edges of whatever we're dry brushing. So one thing I'll probably end up doing later on the hair on top of his head, I do want to distinguish it from the fur on the rest of his body. So I'll probably end up doing a wash and then doing some hand highlighting, because the actual hair mold, I guess you could say, is a lot larger than the fur on the rest of his body, so it's gonna be a little bit easier to control that. So that already is looking 1,000 times better because we have some nice shade, some nice highlights from that dry brushing. Again, if you're new to painting or if you are interested in the hobby, learn to dry brush. It is so easy and yet so incredibly effective. It really is one of those techniques that everyone should have in their arsenal. It's super easy to learn. I'm just going to pull off some of this excess paint. All I'm doing is I'm taking the dry brush and I'm rubbing it up against the side. I'll add just a touch of water. Like so. And I'll just start working that to remove a lot of the paint from the brush. Again, using that edge to kind of scrape it away. And then drying it off on my paper towel. pull a little bit more water just to dampen the brush a bit. Because what that's actually doing is it's activating the what would you call that? Can't think of what it's called right now. Not the pigment, the medium, which is what carries the pigment. It's what makes paint. It's reactivating the medium and allowing me to clean it off the brush more effectively. So I think that looks good. We'll put away the texture palette for now. We'll come back to that in a bit. For now, we are going to start our painting up our midtone on the body of Senor Minotaur. So one of the things you'll notice is we have a lot of these smaller molds versus like the larger molds on his pectorals. So what I'm going to do is I am going to paint around these to an extent. I'm going to give them a midtone, and then I'll use my highlight to kind of distinguish them from each other a little bit more. So when doing skin and highlighting skin, you want to make sure that your midtone is going all the way up to where your highlight or where your shadow starts. So if you notice what I did just there, is I'm trying to get as close to these lines as possible, so that I'm just getting that thin line of the shadow along the muscle group. And for the bottom, where we have that turn, I'm going all the way to where the turn basically almost ends, just so that the underside of the muscle group is highlighted. Same with up here where the pec stops and kind of his upper chest starts. I'm going all the way right up to that with my midtone, just so that the shade color is only in the recess. Remember, when we're painting skin specifically, no islands. So we want all of our groups of highlights to be connected. We don't want any highlight or midtone to be by itself. So we're just moving along that muscle group. And we'll go all the way up to where the highlight would stop, and all the way down to where it would stop. And we'll just keep doing that until this whole muscle group has been painted. Like that. And we're going to do this for every single part of this torso, making sure that our midtone is what our skin color actually is, and that color that we used initially, all we're using that for is to essentially bring out the shadows. For this, you'll want to use a brush that has different characteristics depending on what exactly you want. If you want to cover a lot of area, but you still want to be precise, you want to use maybe a 2 or a number 3 brush, depending on the size of your miniature. But you want, the most important thing is that it has a nice sharp point to it, so that you can be precise in how you are painting each muscle group. And the interesting thing about a lot of these miniatures that have these really cool like muscles that are like accentuated for what they are, right? Because there isn't a soul alive that has this muscle group, right? Oh, I kind of lost that. Oh well. I can go back and fix it later. I kind of lost. Oh, there it is. Sweet. So I almost lost the line that was molded into this, but found it again. There isn't a soul alive that has this kind of muscle group, right? So there is an aspect to this that is going to be pure fantasy, obviously. But kind of like what I was explaining earlier, I want my painting to be a blend of realism and fantasy. So I like to have some aspects of my painting look real. So I want, for instance, his skin to look how skin would actually act. Versus making it more fantasy aligned, because humans, even though we may not know exactly what's wrong when painting something like this, our eyes are going to be like, oh, that just doesn't look right for some reason. We may not be able to articulate why it doesn't look right, but we will be able to recognize that it doesn't. And so when we're doing even fantasy stuff, we want to make sure that we are following certain rules, unless our goal is to break those rules, right? So sometimes you want to paint a creature that is otherworldly or so completely different from what our reality is, and you want to bring attention to that versus not. So you might use brighter skin tones, you might use a iridescent effect versus a more of like a highlight shade effect. But even in those that we're trying to make look otherworldly and weird and kind of interesting, there are still rules that we have to live by, because we as humans, our eyes will look at something that is otherworldly and just say, that just doesn't look right. We may not be able to articulate why, but we'll just intrinsically and naturally know that doesn't look right. Which is why it's kind of the same idea as the uncanny valley, right? When we look at a face that is just different enough from what we normally see, we feel uncomfortable, or it looks weird to us, which is why when video games or movies, when we see a face that's really, really well done, but it doesn't look exactly human, that's why it looks weird. Because we're so used to seeing human faces that when we see a human face that looks close enough to being human, that we can tell that's what it's supposed to be, but it doesn't look like human. It looks animated or computer generated or whatnot. There's something that goes off in our brain saying, yeah, that's not real, and it makes us feel uncomfortable and it seems weird. So that's why I like to blend reality with fantasy. It's kind of the same. It's one of the. I'm kind of trying to apply a concept. So my minor in college was in creative writing. And one of the things that my professors try to drill into us is that whatever you do, you can do whatever you want in your book. Be super creative, right? But there are certain rules that your characters in your world must live by. You can make up those rules, but one thing you have to do is you cannot make your characters or your world so otherworldly that people can no longer identify with them. Because the greatest stories in history are stories that are both fantastic in that they are fantasy, right? That they're not real and they're very far away from our reality, but that we can relate to. For instance, one of my favorite book series of all time is made by or written by a guy named Brandon Sanderson. It's called the Stormlight Archives. The world of the Stormlight Archives is so incredibly different from our own. There are spirits called Spren that populate the world. It's just normal for everyone to see. There's this essentially massive hurricane that comes through regularly and destroys the world. And the closer you are to what's known as the source, basically where the storm comes from, the more intense it is. And it kind of dies off as it goes across the land. We would never see something like that in our world. But because it is, Brandon Sanderson did a good job of making it part of that world, it doesn't seem out of place for the story. But at the same time, the humans who are in that story deal with politics, they deal with death, they deal with sorrow, they deal with frustration, they deal with mental illness, which is a big thing in the Stormlight Archives, to the point where Brandon Sanderson actually consulted psychiatrists and psychologists and experts in the field to make sure that he got all of like the way that he portrayed these different mental illnesses such as depression or multiple personality disorder, to make sure that he got them right. And so what it ends up with is a world that is relatable to us because we know some of these things, right? We've seen people who are depressed. We may not have seen somebody with multiple personality disorder, but we have definitely heard about it and know enough about it that we'd be able to recognize when it's not done right. And of course, Brandon Sanderson, because he made sure he got it right, it is just all the better. So, similar to painting miniatures, there has to be enough reality mixed in with your fantasy so that people can recognize and relate to what you're doing. I think he's looking good so far. What do y'all think? Now, I say all that and it sounds awesome. I'm still very new, or not very new. I still don't have all the techniques that I want to get down, right? Non-metallic metal, for instance, is one of those aspects of things where we want to really mimic how metal behaves, but it's also super fantasy. And I talked about this the first time that I talked about non-metallic metal. And that is that non-metallic metal, especially when it comes to things like weapons and swords, we're more concerned about it looking good than it looking real. Which is fine, right? The whole point we're doing miniatures is either A, we're going to use them practically in the case of Warhammer and D&D miniatures and things like that. But miniatures of this size and a lot of the 75mm stuff that I do from Loot Studios, I do it because I want to display it. I want to have fun doing the hobby versus necessarily making a practical miniature. So I want it to, beyond anything else, I want it to look good. So sometimes reality doesn't look like what we want it to look like. So that's when you can change it. As long as it still has enough reality in it so that whoever's looking at it can recognize what it is and what it's doing. Right? In the case of a game like Warhammer 40k, none of us have ever seen a Space Marine before. But we know what light does when it hits armor that is painted with a matte finish. We know what it looks like for light to reflect off of lenses. We know what light does to metal if it is, we know what something looks like when it's glowing. So we can take all of these different concepts of stuff that we recognize from our experience in the world around us, in actual reality, and use it to paint another reality in a way that is recognizable. So like, if I'm painting Tyranids, and I want to have those Tyranids' eyes glow, then I need to know how light works, how light reflects off of surfaces, and how glow works, and things like that. If that doesn't make any sense at all, it's probably because I'm explaining it badly. Now, one thing that happened here is I tried to use a little bit of glue to kind of seal this gap on his shoulder, and it ended up kind of marring it, but I'm actually use that to my advantage. Kind of something we talked about the other day is, are you using your mistakes to make the miniature look better, or are you trying to cover them up? In this case, I actually want to use that mistake to almost make it look like a scar on his shoulder, maybe like a burn mark or something like that. Because it looks kind of like that, right? So I'm just going to make sure that all of my muscle groups are nice and connected. I think that's looking nice. So let's continue with the back here. Just that we're staying consistent with what we're painting and not jumping around. Now this is part of miniature painting that I absolutely love, because this is where we start to see all the cool details come out. This is where the miniature starts saying, hey look, I'm an actual thing, versus paint and plastic. I have character. I have, you know, for this Minotaur, he's ferocious or ferocious looking. So now is when we start seeing that really start to show up. We start seeing all these different muscle groups, and we start seeing all of the different details that this miniature has to offer. So when we're painting them, we start really figuring out what this character is and adjusting for it. So there's a little bit behind this axe. So sometimes this stuff like this can be a bit annoying, where there's weapons or bits in the way. Just kind of figure out how to work around it. Thankfully this is plastic, so plastic can bend. So I'm just gonna bend this a little bit out of the way so I can grab that. No big deal. For some of this, I'll grab my smaller brush, but we have enough of a point on this brush so I can do most of this detail work with it. Again, that's one of the benefits of having a nice brush set. Ooh, hands having the shakes. It happens every so often whenever I'm painting. Not sure exactly what causes it. I think maybe a little bit of hand fatigue from working all day, because I type a lot at work, but it's all right. So you can kind of see the difference in detail between those two, where we've got the one side where we're kind of starting to see the way his muscles are setting, with the other side where, yeah, there's a little bit of detail, but we really don't see it nailed out and it doesn't look as clean. Especially when we look at the front and all those cool little details are showing. And I'm just going to work on refining some of these a little bit more. Some of these, there's a little bit too much shadow poking through, so I just want to push it a little bit closer to the edge. Very similar to what I do to people's sanity on a daily basis. Speaking of which, I kind of proud of this joke, but my dad's birthday was yesterday, and I, being consistent with who I am, totally forgot to call him. I just got really busy last night, got wrapped up in a bunch of things, and just slipped my mind, even though my sister 100% reminded me. But anyway, I called him up today, and so I called my dad to wish him a happy birthday today, because his birthday was yesterday, of course. And I said, hey man, you know, got the pleasantries out of the way, be like, hey Dad, how you doing? Oh, doing great. And he's like, yeah, what you need? I'm like, oh, well, you know, I was just sitting on the toilet taking a massive dump, remembered it was your birthday, finished pooping, and then figured I'd give you a call. I don't think I've laughed me and him laughed that hard in a long time. That was so good. I don't even think I got through saying that whole little spiel without laughing, and I'm pretty sure he was cracking up before I finished too. It was good time. I almost wish I had recorded that because it was peak. There we go. But yeah, so I know I've said this before on, I guess it was last Wednesday, I think it was. No, actually it was Monday, about like my appreciation for everything that is this stream, right? The fact that I've got so many people who, you know, show up hopefully to watch me paint, but also I've got a lot of people who also show up just to show up and to hang out, to support me, and super grateful for all of you guys. Again, I know I said that on Monday, but I genuinely appreciate every single one of y'all, even if you're just lurking in the background. You guys are awesome. So grab my smaller brush just because I've started getting into areas that I think will need a little bit more precision. And while the larger brush, the number 2 brush I was using, has some really good bristles and really amazing points to where it's very accurate for the size brush it is. By the way, that is Game Envy, who produced a paint handle a while back on Kickstarter, and recently did their wet palette, which is the wet palette I'm using now, which is phenomenal. It's probably my favorite one I've ever used. I just saw these brushes on their website for $10 for Kolinsky Sable brushes, which is insane. I prefer these over my Winsor Newtons. And for y'all that know what a Winsor Newton is, Winsor Newton are like $20 to $25 depending on the brush. They're considered to be the best brushes, best Kolinsky Sable brushes in the world by a lot of people. Are really popular with hobbyist painters. And I actually prefer this $10 brush to those. I prefer a brush that's a little bit springy. And these brushes seem to have the right amount of length as far as like bristle length for it to hold a nice amount of paint, so that I'm not constantly having to go back to my wet palette, while at the same time having a good springiness to them. And to me, it's like the perfect balance. And they're cheap, and they're just so good compared to what I have been using. So if y'all are in the painting hobby, I encourage y'all to go ahead and pick up a set. I only have the number 1 and number 2 brushes just because I wanted to try them out, and I was like, oh, it's gonna be $20 for both, so might as well buy a couple and try them out. And again, nothing but good things to say about them. At least right now. I haven't used them a long time, so I can't speak to their longevity, but they're Kolinsky Sable, man. So if you take care of them, they'll probably last years. And as you can see, they're really, really precise too. So I'm going to switch back now to my bigger brush. Also, I just realized I'm doing this and it probably looks weird on camera, but for those of you who are wondering why I'm actually licking my brush after I wash them, so I only learned about this because I've seen other painters do it, and I figure it was like one of those things, like, you know, if you play basketball and you've always watched a certain player, you're gonna mimic certain things about that player. Like, for instance, there are some people who like stick their tongue out when they're shooting, and then if you watch that player enough, you'll start doing that unconsciously. So I figured it was just a bunch of people who did that, right? They watched a certain dude on YouTube, and then just kind of pick that up as a habit. But there's actually a really good reason why, and I've kind of experienced it myself, just kind of discovering it through my own experimentation. And that is, there are certain proteins in your saliva that bind the bristles together a little bit better than, say, water does with its own surface tension. And so by licking your brush, you can actually get the brush to stay in a sharper point longer while using it. And so if you're trying to do really precise work, like I am now, and you want that precise point, you lick your brush, and that will actually keep your brush and pointy and work a little bit better for you. Sounds weird, but it works, promise. Figure I should explain that so people don't just come onto the stream and be like, why is this dude sticking his brush in his mouth? It's a little weird. Not that anybody on my stream would actually talk like that, but you know. If you do, then you know what? I'm sorry. Not really. But yeah, that is why I lick my brush. Now realizing that sounds kind of weird. I need Calico here to say something back to that. There we go. That's looking really, really, really nice. So that is our mid-tone. That is going to be the primary color of the miniature. So now that we're done the torso and the arms, we're going to move to the neck and head. So the neck is a little bit weird, a little bit funky, but then again, so is the face because it's a cow face. And I've never painted a cow face before, so this is going to be an adventure. So we're going to do the same thing with the neck. We're going to hit all the highlights, pushing those highlights all the way up to the very edge of the highlight to make sure that we are we only have the shade in the very, very deepest recesses of this mold. And this could be fun too, because I have to hold my brush in a weird way to get to it. I always get kind of nervous whenever I'm trying something new or trying something different, because inevitably that's when my hands start shaking. Which they did there, but I was able to control it enough to where it actually looked decent. And that's the thing, guys. If your hands shake, you know, you can still paint. There's still ways to kind of mitigate that. For me, I don't have anything like an essential tremor or anything like that to where I can't not shake. I'm sure there are ways to mitigate that, but don't let that keep you from trying the hobby. You know, just figure out a way that works for you. Try out a few things, see if you can do it. Because I think you can. Even if you think like, hey, maybe you don't want to paint because you're not artistic. Well, guess what? Doesn't matter. Try it anyway. I think you would surprise yourself, because I've met people who say they're not artistic until they try something for the first time, right? Whether it be music, painting, and they discover that they are artistic, just not in the way that they thought they were, right? So instead of being maybe a painter, they're really, really good at sculpting or pottery, right? Or even like a different art. Because like, for instance, a lot of people don't think about stuff like what Matt does, sound design. Sound design is just as much of an art as the actual person recording the music, right? So if you're not the artist behind the guitar or the vocals or whatever, but you're really good at mastering and mixing, you are just as much an artist as that person is. Because it takes just as much of an ear for music and an ear for art to be able to make their art sound better than it does to actually play the music. So I would just say, even if you think you're not artistic and you're interested in painting as a hobby, just try it out. It may end up not being for you, but there's absolutely no harm in trying. And it may end up that you are not good at it, but you still enjoy doing it. And guess what? That's fine, man. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't do something because you're not good at it. I guarantee you there are plenty of people who play sports who aren't good at sports but do it because they enjoy it. Right? They're not looking to be a professional. They're not looking to maybe get a scholarship to a school. But maybe they just do it because it's fun. Right? And that's completely valid. You could be the most uncoordinated, unartistic person in the entire world, and if you have fun painting miniatures that look gaudy and awful, guess what, man? Do it. Because if you enjoy it, that's what matters. You don't have to be good at something in order to enjoy it. Along with this, I'm trying to kind of figure out what color I want to make his eyes. And this is kind of going back to that, do I want him to be good or do I want him to be like more of an evil guy, right? If I want him to be evil, I want him to have red eyes. If I want him to be more good, and like this, almost like this concept of a misunderstood or a trying to do better Minotaur, trying to do better than his reputation or whatever, then I don't want him to have red eyes. I want maybe just a blue eyes, or maybe brown eyes, or whatever color eyes cows normally have. I don't know, because I'm not around cows a lot. Again, I think it's a cool concept to do, where it's like this idea of this Minotaur is so badly misunderstood, and that he is trying to kind of combat that misunderstanding by good deeds. And unfortunately, the society around him, even though he's trying to do good, still misunderstands him. And so that even though everyone understands that he's trying to do good, instead of having him help like anyone normally would, they have him use his brute strength or his intimidating demeanor instead of his desire to help people in the way that he wants to help people. Maybe he wants to help people in a different way. But because of the way people treat him, the way people act around him, he has found that the best way for him to help people is to defend them. So maybe he is somebody who has dedicated his life to helping others in any way possible. And the best way that he knows to help people while still dealing with that is to not play into the stereotype, but to use it to his advantage in fulfilling his goals. Right? So people think he's scary. All right, he's going to be scary. But who's he going to be scary to? He's going to be scary to the highway robbers who keep attacking the people that live in his town. Or he uses people's fear of him to ensure law and order. Or maybe all the frustration of him being misunderstood and stereotyped by a bunch of, let's be honest, racist people in Faerun, for instance, if we're talking D&D, that he's just like, you know what, fine, you wanted a brute, you think I'm a brute, then I'll be a brute. And he's not evil, but he's driving people away to protect himself. I don't know. I'm trying to kind of come up with a very compelling backstory for this guy to be good. Maybe he's just evil. I don't know. Tell me what y'all think. Because I don't want to, like... Obviously, there are people out there that have absolutely experienced racism, right? And I don't want to create a backstory that makes light of that. But at the same time, I think this... A creature like, for instance, a goblin, or if we're talking D&D, a goblin or a minotaur or something like that, a creature that is, or even like, for instance, a drow or a tiefling, creatures that are considered devils and demons and bad things by normal society. I feel like that's a great opportunity to kind of tell a story of taking that hatred and turning it on its head and being better than the hatred itself. I don't know. I feel like that's a very compelling story no matter who you are. But I don't want to make light of other people's struggles in life, if that makes sense. So I'd love to do that, but again, in a respectful way. So, I do believe that is all of our initial skin tone done. So now what I'm going to do is, I do want to start highlighting, but what I don't want to do is go straight to my highlight. Because if I go straight to my highlight, then likely what will happen is I will get this stark contrast between my highlight and my midtone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull away some of my midtone. I'm going to pull away some of my highlight, about equal parts. And I'm going to mix those two together. And we'll do like a I don't know what you would call it, like a pre-highlight highlight, I guess. So this is going to go about halfway up to where I stopped with the first highlight, or with the midtone. And then I'm going to go all the way to the edge of the shadow as well, because part of the purpose of a highlight is to create contrast. So we want that contrast between light and dark, because that's where we're going to get a really, really good juxtaposition. And a juxtaposition is basically a high contrast, and the whole point of that high contrast is to, you know, it's basically like if you set white next to black, it's a lot of contrast between white and black, and the whole purpose of that is the contrast itself. It's used a lot in literature to make points, right? So a form of like, I guess you could say, literary juxtaposition would be hyperbole. So using, like, overstating a fact or overstating a point for the purpose of emphasizing that point. So, for instance, if I were to say, nobody in the United States likes Taco Bell anymore, right? What I'm actually meaning isn't that nobody at all likes Taco Bell, but it seems that it is less popular now than it has ever been. Not saying that's true, but that's just an example, right? We could. So what I'm doing is I'm using a blatantly over-exaggerated point to kind of emphasize what I'm trying to communicate. And so that's kind of the same in what I'm doing here, is I'm using the highlight to overemphasize some of my shadow so that I get that contrast between light and dark and make it look a little bit nicer. And what we'll end up with is a nice smooth transition from light to dark, ending in that juxtaposition. Again, we're just going to work this all the way to the shadow and about halfway up our midtone. On some of these parts that are curved, like his muscles, I'm actually going to start giving it a little bit of shape as well. Instead of just going straight across. Because that shape, again, will emphasize some of these textures and some of these shapes that are already on the mold. Now, the challenge here is hoping that I got the right amount of paint. And challenging parts are like this muscle group right here on his trap. Because the top would obviously be highlighted. And I want to maintain that highlight on for that kind of contrast. So where do I put the shadow or the midtone? It's just going to go right there in the back. Go. And again, you can kind of see if you compare these muscle groups here to that one right there, you can see where our highlight is kind of starting to emphasize certain parts of the muscle group. Now, all along some of these muscles are details that were a little bit shallow that I didn't want to have the full-on shadow effect. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually going to leave the mid-tone there and highlight around it so that we still have that detail highlighted and shaded, but not as intense. So like right there. Again, we're kind of left with this interesting area where we have a light source would be hitting the top of this muscle, but also I want that edges, along those edges, right? So again, it's gonna be one of those areas where the top is highlighted, but the bottom, or the middle, in the bottom is highlighted, but the middle isn't. And we have more of those interesting shapes all around here. So for this, the center of it is going to remain unhighlighted. And we're just going to make sure we go around, like right here. We're going to go around the shade instead of the other way around. We get to the few of these more regular muscle groups like we were doing earlier. Because that bit is easy. Well, easy. All right, so I'm running out of my paint here, so I'm going to pull in a little bit more. You know what? In fact, I'm going to take my olive skin. I'm actually going to put a drop. So we were about 50-50, so I'm just going to put a drop there, or two. Let's do two, just in case. And then I'm going to do the same with the olive skin highlight, just so that we have a bigger pool. 1, 2. So 50-50 shadow, or I'm sorry, 50-50 mid-tone and highlight. All right, that looks good. And as far as quantity goes, it should be fine. And we're just going to keep going along all these muscle groups, very same as we did before. We're just not going all the way up. Now, some of these are going to be really interesting because they are more vertical than horizontal. For instance, along his backbone, there's like that little groove. So for that, we're just going to work our highlight up and along that ridge, getting narrower as we go up. Hey Liam, what's going on, man? It's good to see you. Kind of missed you at the beginning. I was like, oh man, Liam's normally here. Where'd he go? Hope your day's been going well, man. Just painting a Minotaur, dude. He's looking pretty awesome. Go. Now, one interesting challenge right there where I kind of messed the model up with the glue and it's kind of melted. I want that to look like a scar, so we're gonna have to come back after our highlights with a much more white. Okay, gotcha. Well, did you win? Because I think that's the most important question. Did you decimate your opponents? This is going to be an interesting bit to get here. There we go. Cool. The shakes, man, the shakes. Ah, gotcha. What do you mean you got top 4 in your bag? So like top 4 in like a league, or just like your first 4 matches? Like, what do you mean by top 4? Keep in mind that I know nothing about Hearthstone, so. Gotcha. So what does that auto battler do? So is it like a computer that you're going up against, or is it just like automatically calculating like a win or a lose? I'm not gonna lie, I am blanking on TFK on that abbreviation. Gotcha. Ah, okay, got it. It's like, I know some of those words, and then you mention it, and I'm like, oh, I know those words. All right, so next up is Le Face for our initial highlight phase. So this one's going to be a little bit more fun. A bit more interesting, I think. And we're just going to hit all of these lower sections on this particular one. And anything that looks like it's raised, almost like a human face, even though it's a cow face. It is bovine in nature. I have no idea what that accent was, and I don't think I'll ever do it again. Very true. That's the thing about words. Sometimes they make perfect sense, and other times they make you want to curl up in a ball and wonder why words even exist. Okay. I think that's looking nice. Now we move on to the final highlight, the bright highlight. Ooh, this paint is actually getting pretty dry, which is unfortunate. How long have I been going? Holy cow, it's already been 2 hours, man. I've not kept track of time with this one at all. It just shows you how much fun I'm having. I like this miniature a lot. So final highlight, we are going to really just hit the edges closest to our shade, about halfway up our last highlight. We might, once all is said and done, depending on how things look, we might go ahead and add a glaze to help blend between our first highlight and our final highlight. But I think so far things are looking nice, so we may not have to worry about that. Again, on this, some of these muscle groups, we're going to be adding shape with our highlight to emphasize what's already there. So this stage isn't quite an edge highlighting stage, but it's going to be fairly close. So, and I might actually add some edge highlights. Again, just depends on how it looks when all is said and done. Because again, we don't want this skin to look shiny, but we do want to make it look like it is lit. Remember, the shinier a substance is, the more contrast you want. So for instance, with metal, you want your reflections to be high contrast. So you want to go from your shade to your quote-unquote mid-tone, because it's not really a mid-tone, extremely quickly. You want to ramp up the luminance value, so how bright the actual paint is. So you want to go from a dark, gray to a light gray instead of a mid gray, all the way up to almost white very quickly. And that will make it look shiny. And you won't really have to worry about clean transitions on everything, because the harsher, or the more, not harsher, that's the wrong word, abrupt, I guess, your transitions from light to dark, the more it will read as shiny. Now that's not always the case, right? So you do want to have some smooth transition, but it's not as important as something else, as other things. So, and likewise, if you really want your metal to read dull, you want to make those transitions as smooth as possible, because that will read as dull metal, which is exactly the opposite of skin. Because if your skin has a lot of contrast, it will look wet. And if you add little contrast, it looks dry. Depending on the effect that you're going for in your miniature, having high contrast on things like skin just does not look good. So again, it's all about what you want to do with it. Oh, I just realized I was pulling from the wrong paint pile on those last highlights, so I need to go back and do them again. It's okay, stuff like that happens. Especially with stuff like this too, where his muscles, like, I really want to see, like, almost like the tendons in the muscles pulling. Having some higher contrast would actually be helpful, because it will kind of add to this idea of there being ridges in his muscles where they're being taut, and kind of add to the illusion of his, like, having these really big kind of tight muscle groups. I'm trying to be very careful with how I describe this, how to do skin. Because if I'm not too careful, it'll sound a little weird. But I'm pretty sure that's par for the course for me. It's going to sound a little bit awkward no matter how I describe it. Again, just following the natural flow of the muscles, pushing our highlight all the way up to our shadows. And then just highlighting where we think the light would hit. And I am doing exactly what I was talking about earlier, y'all. So for those of y'all who are just joining me, I talked a little bit earlier about how I feel like I talk a ton at the beginning of my stream, but I tend to drop off towards the end. And part of that is because I am painting more detailed, or more details. But some of it too is because I just run out of stuff to say. Which is impressive because I talk a lot in real life. I'm one of those people. So what I mean by natural flow of the muscles is the natural way that the muscle is shaped. So the actual shape of the muscle is what I mean by flow. Not necessarily that muscles quote unquote flow. It's more of how is the muscle shaped? And so we're going with that natural shape of the muscle. And what I mean by flow is, especially when you're talking about circular motion or curved motion, there is a flow to it that you want to follow. That's what I mean, not necessarily that muscles, quote unquote, like flow like water. Right, I gathered that, yeah. I knew you were not talking about the shellfish. Looks, but I do think I want to, after I'm done this highlight, add one more highlight and put in a little bit of a cream or an off-white color, so that we can push up these highlights a little bit more in luminance value, or whatever you want to call it. How bright the paint is. if y'all want, I'm not an expert in all things art terms, but I do know a little bit about stuff like that. So if y'all are interested in like a video or something explaining things like what is luminance, what is opacity, you know, when we talk about the value of the color, what does that mean? Be more than happy to kind of do my best to explain what little I know about that stuff. Or always just drop in a video of somebody who is much smarter than me talking about it and probably explaining it a lot better. Because I am 100% still learning. But there's always an opportunity to learn together. That's fine. Again, so like the way I see it is the role of the communicator is to ensure that the person listening gets the message, right? So even if you misspelled a word or something like that, I still understood what you were saying, and that's what counts. That's what matters the most, is that your message is received and that the person receiving the message understands what you were trying to say. So unless I completely misunderstood your point, doesn't matter if you spelled muscle as in the things in your body or the things at the bottom of the Z. Or actually, I guess, lake, because I think mussels are freshwater, right? Dude, I am liking the way this Skidoo is looking, and I'm excited about doing the rest of him. I just don't know where I want to go from here. I think I want to go for another highlight, but I'm not entirely sure. If I do, I'm going to add a little bit of probably either pallid witch flesh or that bright bone that I used last time. The bright bone is good because it's more of an off-white. The pallid witch flesh is really nice because it's got a little bit of a reddish pink tone to it. So it's really good if you're trying to use it to complement another color that you're using, such as this, the tone I am now, because this brown is this skin tone, a little bit on the reddish side to an extent. There is definitely red in it, although it is probably mostly brown. A lot of browns and a lot of browns and a little bit of red, probably some a little bit of yellow too, maybe, depending on the shade that we're at. So this highlight definitely has some yellow in it. But I do like the idea of pushing the highlight one more time, just so that we can get that nice contrast that we're looking for. Totally forgot about the ear, so I'm just going to push this highlight there and leave the inside the ear the same tone, because it kind of emphasizes the shadow a little bit nicer. So let's grab, we'll go with the Pallid Witch Flesh for now. We'll put some here. So we'll probably use that again somewhere else. I tend to use this shade a lot, especially because it's a good substitute for pure white. So we'll grab a little bit of our pure highlight color. We'll just take a little bit of the Pallid Witch Flesh and start mixing it in so that we get a couple shades brighter. That's probably good. It doesn't have to be too much brighter, just enough. Just enough. Just gonna put this along the very edges of everything. So this could be more of an edge highlight than it was an actual highlight, like full highlight. And this will help me emphasize the shape of some of these muscles as well. I'm trying to have a very steady hand when I do this, so if I don't talk as much as I normally do, that is why. But if you have any questions, I'll be happy to stop and answer them for you. Because this stream, well, it's fun for me, and I love doing it. It's as much about y'all as it is for me. So if y'all have any questions, I'd be more than happy to pause and answer them. I should probably emphasize that I mean questions about the miniature. Because I know there are a few of you who would jump on the opportunity to ask some random question. I'm looking at both matte and calico. I'm really liking how that is turning out. It looks so good. I'm excited now. Although I feel like I'm always excited when I get to this stage of the mini, because again, it just looks so good when it gets to this stage that I get excited about the fact that we're finishing it and it looks spectacular. Again, I'm kind of both looking at the miniature in my camera and then IRL, because I want kind of the close-up view that I'm getting IRL, but then kind of that bird's eye view from this perspective, from the camera's perspective. There we go. See, if you look at that, look at the back on the left side versus the right side, it just adding that little sliver there adds so much depth and character to this thing. Really does look good. And again, I don't mean to sound like I'm trying to brag on myself. I'm just really excited about how this is turning out. you go. Cool, 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 cool. Liking it, liking it, liking it, liking it. Again, pretty much all we're doing here is we're just adding some edge highlights to this guy to try to emphasize where those muscle groups are starting and stopping. Now I am in certain places adding a little bit more of a bold highlight, just because there are certain places where I want the highlight to be a little bit brighter. So I'm just going to add it a little bit more bold, just so that we can emphasize that a little bit better. There. We're going to do his legs. His legs are a little bit weird looking. There's a lot of texture on it, and I'm not exactly sure what it's meant to be. So I'm just painting what's there, and it's looking a little bit odd, but you know what? We're going to roll with it. Again, there are certain times where you can almost paint against the actual miniature. And what I mean by that is, say the miniature has an error in it, right? Maybe you 3D printed it and there was an error in the 3D print, but you, for whatever reason, if you don't like having filament or resin left, for whatever reason, it just doesn't look good, and you just have to deal with what you have. There are ways that you can cover up aspects of the model with the way you painted. I know I mentioned that when I was doing Nadar's miniature, who is one of the characters from the Trials of Imagination stream, that his had a print error on it, and I was able to cover up that print error to the point where I can't even tell where it is anymore. And I printed it. And part of that was just using highlighting and shading to emphasize certain areas and de-emphasize others. So you are absolutely able to cover up certain things on the miniature in order to, again, emphasize or de-emphasize certain aspects. Maybe it's an error, maybe it's a part of the actual cast that you didn't like. Or you can kind of do what I like doing, and that is just using that error to give character. So maybe your, like for instance, this error here where it looks like the plastic melted, using that as a burn is a way of using the error on the miniature to your advantage. The only thing I'm nervous about is I still have not painted this guy's eyes. And eyes are the hardest part of any miniature. Cool. All right, I think I'm done with his skin. It took me 2.5 hours to do just his skin. So let's go ahead and move to some of his hair. So our highlight for our hair was the, where are you at? Earth brown. So I'm gonna take some more of that earth brown. I'm going to use a little bit of that Pallid Witch Flesh just to lighten it up a little bit. We'll start doing some highlights on his hair. Don't want it too bright. We just want a couple shades lighter. So what we're going to do is we're just going to use the side of our brush to hit the peaks of all of these different hair strands. Because again, we already dry brushed it, so we're already got some natural highlights and shades there. There's no need to really do what's already been done, other than just emphasizing some of these edges. Like so. So you can kind of see the comparison of the one half to the other. It just makes the details on the hair pop just a little bit more. Makes it look naff. And again, we're going to make mistakes on this. That's okay. In this case, because the overall look of the miniature is one of roughness, there is a certain amount of mistakes that we can use to our advantage in making this miniature look the way we want it to. Now, we don't want to make it look like we've been sloppy, but at the same time, a rough look is beneficial to us. Just using the side of my brush, sometimes using the tip of the brush, just to hit all of these raised bits to give it a little bit more emphasis, so we can see that hair detail a little bit better. For the legs, the hair on the legs and arms and things, I'm actually going to use a wash for that. And then we'll probably go back and dry brush very carefully a little bit of that back in some of the highlights. But again, I wanted the hair on the arms and the legs to be a little bit darker than the hair on his head. So I'm using this wash to not only emphasize some of the details on the hair on the rest of his body, but also to darken the tone down a little bit more. And one of the things that a wash can do for us is not only cover up mistakes and inconsistencies, but for me, I just want to darken the values of the colors that we already have on the legs. And the best way to do this is either start with a darker base coat or just use a wash. And the wash is the easier of the two. Some think wash is cheating. Probably is, especially if I already have the skill to do this by hand. It is definitely cheating because I just don't want to take the time to do this by hand. If this was like a competition miniature or one that I was doing for a friend, I would 100% do all of this by hand. But since this is for me and for demonstration purposes, We're just gonna use a wash. Be lazy. We can be lazy every so often. As long as we're not lazy on every miniature. And again, if I do this and I find that I don't like the leg and arm hair being, or I guess fur more than hair, I don't like it being that darker color, then I can always add this same shade to the hair on his head and we'll get the exact same result. So this is one of those things that really doesn't have a ton of danger, I guess you could say, in just trying. And if it doesn't work, for, you know, like the consistency of the color palette, I can always just change the one that I didn't. And that, in this case, it's the hair instead of the fur. So once that dries, I'll probably hit it with another dry brush so that we re-emphasize the top of the hair and get those nice shade colors. So now let's work on these horns. So we're running at 2 hours, 40 minutes. So I'll stop right at 3 hours. I think that'll be a good stopping point. But I would like to finish his face. So I'd like to get to his eyes, his mouth, and then the horns as well. And then next time, so I guess Monday, we'll work on some of the non-metallic metal, some of the tertiary things like his axe, the little stone altar, and then the ground itself. I think that's a good workflow. What do y'all think? All right, cool. So let's go ahead and grab our Juxtaposition bone. This will be our mid-tone for the horns. Don't know why I'm putting it there because I definitely intended to dry brush that on. Oh, that was kind of a waste. Not gonna need much. We use our smallest dry brush. A little bit more. There we go. So what I'm really just gonna do is I'm just gonna hit the tops of these horns in a very controlled way, because I don't want to get any of this paint on his skin or hair. It's okay if I do, because again, we can deal with that. Need a little bit more. Again, using it, testing it on my hand to make sure we don't have too much or too little, because we want to see the difference, but we don't want to end up with like just this color. We're very gently just going and hitting all these high spots. All right, so next color will be our bone color, our polished bone. And this is going to be our highlight. We're going to add a little bit of the Juxtaposition bone on that, which we already have some of our brush, so that should give us the highlight that we need. Cool. For this, we're just going to hit the very top of the horns, because we want to make it look like the light is hitting it. But the light wouldn't necessarily hit it underneath the bone. And what I should have done before this, and this is my mistake, because I do remember mentioning that I wanted to do a little bit of a use a wash on it so that I could emphasize the dips and things on the horns themselves. Completely forgot about that. So I'm just gonna clean off this brush real quick so that it doesn't dry on me. I'm gonna grab my brown, go ahead and hit it with a quick wash. And then we'll go ahead and do that last highlight again. And again, with this, we want to be careful not to overwash it because we're working on a fairly small area. For this, we're using Agrax Earth Shade from Citadel Colors by Games Workshop. So I used to use a lot of Army Painters paints. Nice. How many moves and how many errors? But anyway, Agrax Earthshade is a great brown wash. I used to use a lot of Army Painter stuff, and then once I started using Citadel's washes, I have not looked back. Like, the consistency is great. While I hate pots for paint, I prefer droppers. I love pots for washes because I'm not trying to measure this out. So I love it for those two reasons. And it flows really well. So we're just gonna have to wait for that to dry for a little while. So in the meantime, we'll go ahead and fix some problems. Not really problems. So there's some, I guess you could say overflow on the belt here from the skin tone. So I'm just gonna cover that up real quick with my black. Which my black, by the way, is Vallejo black. It's not my favorite. I definitely, out of all the paint that I use, I definitely prefer Reaper. I like their consistency. Their paint dries a little bit more matte, which I prefer. So for those reasons, I definitely prefer Reaper paints over Citadel or over Vallejo Citadel Army Painter. But unfortunately, the game shop near me stopped carrying Reaper, so I can't really find it anywhere outside of Amazon. And I prefer to support local game stores, so I don't really buy from Amazon anymore. So I'm taking this kind of hot pink color. This is a pale violet red. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm going to add a little bit of my Pallid Witch Flesh on there to get a kind of a lighter pink. And that's what I'm going to use for his tongue. You know what? I might add just a drop of dark red in there just to pull back on the brightness. Or not the brightness, a little bit too much blue in there. So I'm just going to take a little bit of corn red, mix it in there until I get a nice soft pink color like that. More of a fleshy red color than a pink. And we'll use that on his tongue. And we'll see how it turns out when it dries, because typically stuff dries a little bit darker than it goes on. But here's one of the beautiful things. If I don't like it, I will just change it. Because I don't want to make it look comically bright, right? But at the same time, I do want it to be more pink than red. So I'm going to darken it a little bit right off the bat. And we'll let that dry. And we'll go to the eyes. So first thing I always do with eyes, give it a red base coat. I can see where his eyes are. There's one. Right there. And then the other side. And there's the way these are molded in, they're a little bit smaller than the eye socket around it. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually going to use the eye socket as more part of the eye, the actual eyeball, than just the socket itself. Because the eyes on this are pretty small, and so I'm going to use the entire area that I have at my disposal to actually give it those eyes, so that it's a little bit more noticeable. All right, so the nice. I'm gonna be honest, like, I believe that's good, but I don't play enough chess to know if that's, like, you know, obviously 100% accuracy is good. I'm assuming. So I don't really have much of a frame of reference, but I feel like that's good. So we're just gonna go back over this very gently, making sure that we maintain those nice shadows that we just created with the wash. Gotcha. A little bit more of our bone color because that other stuff dried out. Shocker. What? Paint dries when it sits out? And we're just gonna hit the very top again with our white, or it's not really white, it's more of a pale polished bone color. And we're gonna hit a little bit of the sides because we just want the underneath the horns to be dark. Like it so far. Again, I'm not crazy about the way the mouth is turning out. But I think we can deal with that for now. We can definitely go back and review it later. Now I want to get this brush clean. So all I'm doing is just rubbing it on my palm because your skin is going to absorb a lot of the moisture, so it'll absorb some of the paint as well as some of the water that we just applied to it. So I think he's looking pretty beefy right now. I'm not entirely sure about the tongue. We'll come back to that, but I think I like the direction he's going in. So let's go ahead and do the rest of his eyes. So we'll go ahead and take our Pallid Witch Flesh, which is the tone I prefer to do the whites of the eyes. And we're just going to fill in the eyes while still leaving a little bit of that red around the eye. A little bit more. There we go. Now it looks like he's staring at you. Trying to find the focal point. See, there it is. See, it looks like he's staring at you now. Now, what color should I do the retinas? Or do I want to color the retinas? I don't think I do. I think I just want to go do a pupil, and that's it. I'm going to do the pupil towards the front of the eye. Since the eyes are on the side, I want to make it look like he's looking forward. It's never a good sign when you hear that from somebody trying to do eyes. Kind of messed that one up. I didn't mess up the actual eye, but I got some paint around the eye that I didn't want there, and it's going to be a pain to fix. Whereas this eye was almost perfect. Alright, so now I'm going to use my brush here to absorb a little bit of what I just put down. Or attempt to, but I can't. So let's take some of our highlight here, and what we're going to do is we're going to use this highlight color to cover up the mistake we just made. Didn't help at all, so we're going to have to redo that eye completely. Oh well, happens. So we'll go ahead and cover all that back up with red. And then we'll add the white back and then try the pupil again. But we will have to wait for that to dry. So in the meantime, let's go ahead and look at the rest of the miniature and figure out our plan for next time. So obviously we want to finish what's on the miniature itself, right? So we're going to want to finish the belt. We're going to want to finish some of these metal rings. We're going to do non-metallic metal on that. He's got a couple earrings on him. I think I want to paint those gold. After I finish what's on his body, I'll do what is body adjacent, I guess. So his weapon will come next. And then from there, we'll do the scatter. So there's this little lamp, the altar, and then the grounds. Then any of the actual base that is not the ground will get painted black. And then that'll be it. So that is kind of our order of operations for next time. Hopefully we'll get it done next time. Because I honestly did not realize I spent so long on the body tonight. I was kind of hoping that we'd get done tonight. I didn't think we would. But I was hoping. All right, cool. So that's a good eye so far. And while that dries, I will take the same color. And he does have some exposed teeth, so I'm going to go ahead and paint his teeth this color. So one of the things that I did when I first got this palette, or any Games Workshop paint that I get, I transfer into a dropper, because again, I don't like pots. And so one of the issues you get with that is you have to thin the paint down so that it doesn't take 6,000 years to gloop into a pot. Well, this Pallid Witch Flesh, I actually ended up over thinning. So it always ends up super watery, which, you know, I can deal with, but it's kind of annoying. All right, here's our second try on this pupil. Oh, man. We were almost there, and then the black ran. It was a little bit too thin. So we can just absorb that up with the brush. It's no big deal. And then that just means that for next try, we will need to use our handy dandy paper towel to absorb a little bit of that water. Like that. All right, try number 3, third time's a charm, y'all. I don't know what is going on with this eye right now. For whatever reason, the black is running. So instead of, might have been some water in the eye. All right. I have to cover that back up. Anyone who's ever done miniature painting knows my pain right now, feels my pain. Because this, unfortunately, is super common to have to redo eyes over and over and over again, which is really annoying since that eye right there turned out super good. So again, just wait for it to dry. Take our pallid witch flesh. Paint on the whites of the eyes. Got a little bit of run there. Easily cleaned up. Add a little bit more to our brush here just so we can refine this a little bit more. And we'll try one more time. And I do think it will be one more time because we are 3 hours in to this miniature. And I'm really starting to get annoyed at the fact that we've done this one eye 3 times. When in fact, we're not even adding a ton of detail to this eye, it's just being a booger. I didn't mess it up this time again, but the paint and the brush are not acting like they should, and I don't understand why. I'm using a paint that I've used 1,000 times with a brush I've used 1,000 times. And the paint is just not acting like I need it to. I think for now that's as good as it's going to get. It looks fine, I think, but it could definitely be better. All right, well, I think that's all for tonight. I think we got a lot of work done on this boy. Did a lot of highlighting. I think it looks a little bit cartoony, but I think it works for this sculpt. As always, I will put on more detailed pictures on my Discord and the Trials of Imagination Discord, just so that we can see our progress and kind of track that. As always, I appreciate every single one of you for coming and joining me in this adventure that I call miniature painting. Whether you are lurking or whether you are active in chat, you are always appreciated and more than welcome. So thank you all for coming. I hope to see you Monday night, and until then, I hope you have a fantastic evening.